We all work in schools, so we're all familiar with PBIS, the positive behavior intervention support systems that our schools likely devise and we are helpful in implementing. They reward behavior compliance. And we give out pencils and candy and stickers, maybe even homework passes. They help reinforce common classroom cultures of kindness toward others and things like that. Also, characteristics of self, like responsibility, and maybe even something like excellence. But if you're intending on doing some sort of reward system within your classroom just to represent the behaviors you expect in your classroom, and you are an inquiry based science teacher, then you want something that reinforces those behaviors. And those behaviors are the science and engineering practices. It's the scientific method, the observing, the executing, the analyzing, and so on. They're very different from the behaviors we're typically rewarding. If we include or design or prepare, execute, implement a reward system that reinforces inquiry, then every reward we give turns into a mini science lesson. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Lab in Every Lesson. A few years ago, I designed a science-specific sticker system or a badge system for my own science classroom in the high school. I teach chemistry. Remember, I teach in a cyber school. If you're new here, you don't know me, I actually do teach in a cyber school. Been teaching there 16 years. And as you can imagine, in a cyber environment, it's exceedingly difficult to give tangible rewards. I literally can't use stickers and pencils and erasers unless I'm mailing them, and that's definitely not central to my task every day. So in order for me to try to reinforce science skills and the things I wanted the students to really get it, that it wasn't just about content. I really had to be meaningful, thoughtful, get down nitty gritty into which behaviors I wanted to reward and what job that system was really going to be doing. So today I'm going to share the logic, the reasoning, the intention behind the design of my own inquiry-based reward system for my science classroom, so you can do the same here at the start of the year for yours. The biggest benefit of making your reward system skill specific, science and engineering practices specific, is your students feel seen by you. Are they going to shut you down if you are just a talking head? If they're just a body in a chair and a name on a page? If they feel that from you, then yeah, they probably will shut down. However, if they're feeling seen by you, like in a meaningful way, you know them for who they are, for what they can do, and you're having some one-on-one time with them, then that's going to make a huge impact. It's definitely the love piece of teaching, that human piece of teaching, that definitely lecturing at the front of the room throws out the window. And so how does a skill-specific reward system do that? It's not just saying, here's a pencil, you're great, good job today. It's saying, this is the specific thing I saw you do. And you took, there's a whole lot of unspoken in that. It becomes a cycle. You want to increase your classroom engagement. It's not just about the activity you bring to class every day. It's not just about the science and engineering practices. It's also deeply, deeply about connection. In the same way, what we're doing when we reward specific actions, tasks, skills, outcomes that our students are able to achieve within the context of this reward system is to help them discover their own strengths. I'm a mom of middle schoolers now. Actually, I've got one middle schooler and one going into high school. And I have friends who have older children. And so a lot of the conversation often is getting them ready for college, getting them ready for career. And I can say, looking back on my own experience there, it's kind of a black box. It kind of feels like, where do you even begin? What am I good at? What should I do? That's a big decision to make. What am I going to do for my life? And so as a parent, I don't like to put any pressure there at all. But as a teacher, I recognize that I can help students know their own strengths. Quick side story. I had a teacher in high school who was my student council government representative, and I was student council president at the time, or vice president or something. And I prepared all of these, it was the teacher in me. I prepared all of these binders and all these papers and all this system. And I remember I could put myself there. He's sitting at his desk like I am, and he looked up at me, who was standing in front, and he said, "You should really consider becoming a teacher. You would be a great teacher." I laughed in his face. Honestly, I feel so bad about it now because clearly he prophesied a little bit of future for me. But at the time I laughed because, I mean, I had a whole different path, a whole different thing going on. But I should have valued that more. And he did his job as to say, like, I see. Now, maybe he could have been more specific in what he felt were my strengths, because I could have applied them to any probably number of career paths. Definitely, I probably wouldn't have chosen to be a chemist with the characteristics and the traits that I was exhibiting that would make me a good teacher. For us to point out to a student, let's say, that they have outstanding observations or continually an eye for evidence all year. This is the badge you're giving them most often. Or clear communication. Okay, they're in your science class. They don't want to be a scientist, but man, they're really good at writing. They're really good at speaking on behalf of their small group that they're working on. So they're not just good at teamwork, but they're good at communicating. And that sends a message to them too. They're going, wow, I keep getting rewarded in this area. I didn't think maybe I would be good at journalism, but it's something I've always been maybe thinking about, but dismissed. You're instilling sort of a belief in them. Teachers often underestimate how influential they are in helping students identify their gifts and talents. Finally, within this whole idea of students' well-being, students' belief in self, we're going toward growth mindset in a really big way, but also not in a way where we're giving a growth mindset lesson. If you commit to this for a year or semester, over a period of time, students are going to create a collection of badges, just like they will see the abundance in one or two categories. They collect several, then they'll see, wow, gee, I only have one badge of this and 10 badges of these. That's a place where I can get better. And that's where you can fill a void too, right? To say, this is someplace we can really grow. And you can encourage them in those areas where they sometimes come up short. Now, in the spirit of inquiry-based back to school, we want to talk a little bit about how a science skills specific reward system, an inquiry-based science reward system, reinforces everything you may have taught during the first week. Consistency matters. This is another message you're going to hear me in almost every video I share with you. Every messaging is that lab in every lesson is about making the science come alive, the science as a verb, come alive every day. And so there's consistency element of that. But so it is at the beginning of the school year. You don't want to come out of the gate and say, here's our inquiry-based science syllabus. If you've missed it, we've already published an inquiry-based science syllabus video and also a video on introducing the science and engineering practices specifically. Your syllabus is riddled with inquiry-based student-centered principles, language, ideals. And then maybe on the next day, you're doing an activity that involves sorting your standards for the science and engineering practices. And they're going, whoa, she's serious about this. Well, I'm going to have to make models, and I'm going to have to construct explanations, and I'm going to have to analyze data. I'm going to have to do the math. Wow, I'm going to do a lot that is not just regurgitate science. And then you come out with a reward system where you go, hey, I'm also going to be looking for and acknowledging when you do these things. The classroom message never changes. At some point, maybe they're still thinking, well, this will fizzle out. That happens with teachers. It just fizzles out over the first few weeks. If you commit, and every single day they see it showing up again and again, they're going to take it more seriously. And finally, we're talking about a way we can give formative assessment of a skill. Real-time modeling and formal assessment of a skill, immediate feedback. Yes, your standards, if you're working in the NGSS, your standards are half action and half verb, half noun, half action, half thing. And your tests, your assessments, hopefully aren't all about the stuff, because that would be imbalanced. We're learning and assessing on action, and we're learning and assessing stuff. So you're not, however, going to give a grade each and every day on how students are executing, like on how quality their questions are or how outstanding their observations are. You get an A for observations today and you get a C. How do you do that? You don't. Those are learning moments. Scientists learn through doing that process. As teachers who score and grade and measure and assess, it's a little system for doing that, a soft system for doing that. Now, I know I promised all the logic and reasoning and intention behind this kind of inquiry-based, student-centered, science, skill, reward system, but I'd be remiss to not show you what mine looks like and even how we might introduce it to students without it feeling like an interruption in those first few days of school or completely random. Just like we introduce the science and engineering practices, I always go with it's best to teach it while we do it. So I'm going to show you here. I have my scientific method lesson. Now, it's actually not my scientific method lesson, but it's called that, the scientific method, because our science reward system is acknowledging steps in the method. So always starting out with learning intentions and success criteria here. Today we're learning about the scientific method, and I'm going to jump and help you focus directly on the success criteria for a moment. I'm trying to be really super specific here. I'll be able to, at the end of this class, for a system or object. And again, in so much as this is a video intended to help you with ideas for starting out the school year or implementing this kind of system yourself, you may or may not use the system that I'm using, but maybe something similar. Provide 2 observations, ask 2 questions, identify 1 item of evidence, make 1 inference, and suggest 1 test or experiment. So it's mostly the beginning portion of our scientific method. And then also communicate clearly throughout the lesson as an active member of a brainstorming group. And you'll see in a moment why all of that is important. Quick bit of extra incentive for doing a system like this is if you set an expectation that they could be used as that sort of growth mindset feature, and you're encouraging students to set a goal every day for what part of the scientific action they're going to sort of hone in on and focus, this is a great tool for doing that. So it might be also something you throw in there. This was included in the lesson that I shared with you on an idea for introducing your science and engineering practices. So they're coming back alive here on the next day in my own classroom. And I also want to share the fact that, as I said, we would never, with consistency in mind, deliver a lesson we didn't expect students to act upon. So if our guiding question is always, what can I have students do with this? In this sort of introduction, it's, we're not trying to teach them content necessarily, and we can't really model all the skills in one day. What I wanted them to come out with was, what does each of these badges really mean to them? Before the school year happens, before I start handing them out, how do you think what are these behaviors looking like in order for me to give them to you? And so I would normally upload this into Seesaw. They could or you could use Google Classroom, Nearpod, any of your favorite digital tools, and have students just jot down. It's a Post-it note too. It's not essays, just a couple bullet points. What does it look like when I'm making outstanding observations? What does that sound like? What are we looking for? And then what I proceed to do here, because remember our goals are for a system or object, actually do the things. I do teach chemistry. So what we're trying to model here is, what would it look like to make observations of surface tension, which I don't teach until like February or March, but every student has encountered a droplet or a puddle. And so even though it's a pretty serious science concept, when we get to the nitty-gritty of it, it's pretty basic as an everyday encounter also. So I'd encourage you to, the best thing about this is if you do like a lab, even a hands-on activity at the beginning of the year that is focused on measurement or something very fundamental, very simple, or you're just trying to get them like acclimated to your hands-on tools and atmosphere, you're doing a super simple, very relatable not heavy investigation. And this works right in with that. And we might together talk about what are the observations we would make here for these 3 drops. What do we notice? What do we wonder? You might even notice and wonder. I don't try to emphasize those 2 terms in particular. I really like observations for secondary science, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, especially higher level. But if you like notice and wonder, it works here. Also, quality questions. What can we ask about this to learn more? Every investigation begins with questions. Insightful inferences. What do we already know, or what could we guess? What's the hypothesis we can make before going any further? Can we maybe actually answer some of our questions, or do we have a guess answer to our questions? And then what evidence do we have at the start? What can we specifically cite that we see? And this is an important point for me and my students, is to differentiate between outstanding observations and an eye for evidence. Now, of course, actually in the context of this lesson, remember I'm teaching cyber. So if I go back to quality questions, I am emphasizing that quality questions lead to experimentation. So there is a badge here for experimental design domination. What would you do to answer your questions? And then I think what I have to do basically is come back around to, since we're not actually going to probably do it together, or maybe we are on a webcam, what do we expect to see, right? It's still a guess answer to some of our questions. And then we have awesome analysis. So assuming we did this experiment, and again, I'm bringing it to my students in a series of images, you would probably substitute this entire imagery with something hands-on. Then how can you connect the dots? How can you connect the pieces? And what does that analysis look like? And they're doing it in small groups. You're facilitating as you walk around the room. You're answering questions with questions and all the good student-centered science teacher things. Now, at the end, I'm also sharing with students really what does analysis require. So we do talk a little bit about, well, what is analysis? There's no data here. And in truly inquiry-based lesson that you bring every day, you may not have numbers. You may just have observations, but you can analyze the outcome of tests based on observations. And this is where our cross-cutting concepts can come into play. So I have a little cheat sheet for them that I give them. And we talk about the cross-cutting concepts, and that most analysis involves relationship. How does one thing affect another? And so on. And then at the very, very end, we can look back on our experience and say, we worked in small groups. How did that teamwork go? What did it look like? And what does it mean to clearly communicate? Which is a wonderful place to end, because probably most of you are going to be eventually asking students to communicate with claim, evidence, and reasoning.
Oh, yeah.
There isn't a CER badge, but it's clear communication, because whether we're speaking, whether we're writing, what doesn't matter how we're doing it, we do need to always answer a question with the evidence first and foremost, and some knowledge of those science facts at the tail end. I'm not going to talk through a lot of my CER right here. Stay tuned for a video coming up on that, because I have a really fun, I think, and unique inquiry-based way to introduce and understand CER. And at that time, we'll look closer into this as a before and after. Now imagine it's May. And it's the end of the year, students are cleaning out their locker, they encounter this science notebook where they've been including all of their badges or stickers, and they're looking through and they have so many. What impact does that have? What is the outcome of this system over 10 months that you've implemented? It's actually evidence, which is central to science, right? It's evidence of having learned and practiced so much more than the earth science concepts, than the biology concepts, the agriculture, the chemistry, the physics. It's not just the stuff. It's look what I did over a year. And when they see their grade on their report cards, A, B, C, or even D or F, they've got the evidence for why.